Welcome back to the Purpose-Filled Ambitions podcast. Today's episode is a special one, and I wanted to give a little backstory. A few episodes ago, I had Seth on, and at the end of the conversation, I asked him what his favorite book or podcast was. He mentioned The Walker Way by Bob Walker. That stuck with me, so I looked into it a little bit, did some digging, and ended up reaching out to the Walker Manufacturing to see if they'd be open to collaborate on social media to help promote the book. They got back to me right away, super kind and supportive, and even sent me a free copy of the book. As I read it and learned more about the company, I realized how closely their stories lines up with the heart of this podcast: purpose, legacy, leadership, and faith. So I reached out again and asked the chairman of the company to be on the podcast. He said yes. He's based in Fort Collins, Colorado, and leads a family-owned company that builds high-quality commercial lawnmowers used all over the world. Their story is powerful, and I'm excited for you to hear it. Please welcome Bob Walker. Hey Bob, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fine.
That's awesome. Are you excited about being on this podcast?
I've done a little bit of this sort of thing, and I enjoy it. It's interesting to have somebody ask questions that quite often maybe I've been asked a question, and this gives me an opportunity to practice my answers. I give a lot of tours at our company nowadays. That's one of the things I like to do. So I've worked on my talk as we walk around the manufacturing plant, and sometimes, again, people ask questions. I try to give them answers as best I can.
Awesome. So you should be well prepared for this. That's good to hear. So I just want to start off. I loved your book. I read the whole thing, and that's kind of what queued up this podcast. So I'm really excited to dive into the book and just everything that entails. So first, talk to me about where you're from. Like, you talked about being from Kansas. Is that right?
Yes, I was born in Dodge City, Kansas, and I was raised in a little farming community about 20 or 30 miles from Dodge, out on a family farm in Meade County, Kansas, is where I was born and raised. And then I went away to school, first of all, in another little Bible college in Kansas, and then finally Laterno University down in Longview, Texas. So I lived down there, and then came back and worked in Kansas for 6 years, and then finally joined 50 years ago, made the move to come to work with my parents here in Colorado.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm actually from Kansas City, so it's funny how that all works. My wife went to KU.
Okay.
So we lived in Lawrence for a little bit. So let's just kind of get started. You said your purpose is to be a Christian businessman. That phrase, Christian plus business, carries a lot of weight. Can you kind of unpack what that means to you personally?
Yes, that's a really good way to start questioning. I think the term, it used to mean more than it does nowadays. I think the name Christian, as we oftentimes say, if somebody will ask you, are you a Christian? The word Christian or the term Christian has been almost become a generic word. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there are people that claiming to be Christian that I would wonder, just watching how they put their belief to practice, are they really Christian or not? And a better term that I like to use nowadays is Christ follower. Are you a Christ follower? Because that puts it back to if you're going to be a Christian and name the name of Christ as your model or the one that you're trying to follow, saying you're a Christ follower really tightens that up, I think, so that as a Christian, as a businessman, I'm also a Christ follower. And that means something about the way I live and work in my life and in business in particular. Just as an example, one of the things that we have a little saying here that gives you an idea of people use money. We talk about that a little bit, and that's just the reverse of a typical business. Many businesses are founded the other way around, where they love money and they use people.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the influence of Jesus in our lives, we think the first place to start is to love people. and not be loving money.
Yeah.
We use money; it's a tool, and we're not afraid to make profit. We're a profit-based company. We tend to make money here, but beyond that, we're we believe that one of the most wonderful reasons for being in business is actually to love people and provide relationships that go in that direction.
I love that. I love that. So when did you first realize this was more than just a job, it was a calling?
When I was there, first of all, there's a man that most people may not know because he's a man that was alive and active in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. His name was R.G. Letourneau. He was his base of operations he started a school, a university called Letourneau University or Letourneau College. That's my alma mater. That's where I graduated from in 1969. But before all that happened, my dad and my mom were interested in Mr. Letourneau's testimony, would go around the country and would be willing to come, and anytime he could find an audience that wanted to listen to his story, he would fly into he had an airplane. He'd fly in and give his testimony. Well, one Sunday afternoon, he flew into Kansas to a little farming town called Ashland, Kansas. And as he typically did, he got up in front of the whole gymnasium was filled with people, and he told his story about how he had accepted Jesus as his Savior, taken that step of salvation. He was an inventor. And that was he was basically a very gifted machine designer and businessman. And he assumed that when he accepted Jesus as his Savior, that he would have to move to change his occupation. He would have to become a full-time, either a preacher or a missionary or some other kind of Christian worker. He went to see his preacher and sort of see what the preacher thought. And when he described his struggle to his preacher, the preacher came back and told him, Mr. Letourneau, the Lord needs Christian businessmen just as much as he needs ministers of the gospel and missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then Letourneau said back in those days, that was oftentimes the thinking of people is if I'm a Christian worker, I've got to be, I can't be, there's secular work and sacred work, which was a bad, really misunderstanding of Christian principle. And following Jesus there's lots of ways to be called and to work
Absolutely.
in this world besides just being a full-time Christian worker. And so Mr. Letourneau said, well, I'll be the best Christian businessman that I can be if that's the way it's supposed to be. When I was 13 years old, when I heard him tell this story that I've just told you, and in my heart, I had a voice, not an audible, but a voice in my heart that told me, I believe this is what the Lord has for me. This is my calling, to be a Christian businessman. So that's when I began to understand that I had a calling and not just an occupation.
That's an awesome story, and I appreciate you sharing it with me. And one reason I kind of started this podcast was like there's purposeful ambitions is obviously the name of the podcast, and it's more than just chasing profit. You're chasing purpose, and what does that mean exactly? And I just remember like reading in Matthew 19, I believe it was, and how they talk about the rich man going to heaven and what that means and what I'm referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that I just remember like before really pulling the trigger on this podcast, I was like, because obviously I had desires and I wanted to provide for my family and the motivation of money and things like this. And it's like, well, what's the why behind your money? And like, why do you want to make a lot of money? And something that really stuck out to me is when you're talking about the guy who gave 90% of his income to the tithe, and he said, like, he talked about God's shovel, and God's shovel's bigger than his shovel.
Yes. Yeah.
That was great stuff. I love that.
Well, that was Mr. Letourneau. That was
Okay, I thought it was. I wasn't sure.
That's who I'm talking about. He finally got to the point, he and his wife sat down and figured they had more money than they needed and what level should they give, and they ended up at 90% to the Lord's work and 10% that they could live on. Mr. Letourneau was a very successful man and a millionaire many times over, but he lived very modestly. He was not a person to throw money away or throw it around. One of the things, he had a little Volkswagen car. He could have been driving, a big whatever, but he drove around in his factory. He would drive the little Volkswagen around, and that's just an image that I remember of him.
That's hilarious. So my next question I have is, how does this faith-centered identity shape how you hire, lead, and plan in your business?
Yeah, it shapes all facets of business. I believe that the influence of this faith-centered and the Bible, the biblical account, affects us in every aspect of operating, not just hiring or leading or planning. We have a little card here, which I'll hold up, called What We Believe at Walker. This little card is something we hand to people when they come to work here at the company, so they can understand what guides us, what beliefs do we have. It doesn't have scriptural exact Bible quotes to it. These are statements that we've written, our best understanding of some of the lessons we've learned, but they also represent the principles that we try to follow in operating the business. Just as an example, the very first one of these beliefs, I'll just read it to you: operate by principles that are optimum for employees and their families. That's the first statement. Yeah. And optimum for families has caused us to be organized in a particular way as far as the way we work here at the factory. We work year-round. Even though this is a seasonal business, lawnmowers are not sold at the same rate year-round. We have a cycle that we go through every year. And so some people would approach that and say, well, we'll bring people in when we need them and we'll send them home when we're done. That is, it becomes a seasonal work or temporary work. And I'm not here to criticize companies that operate this other way, that is seasonally. I mean, we're not better than them, or try to hold ourselves up as an example of the way everybody should live. We just chose to operate this company year-round so that everybody that works here has a full-time job. And like we like to say, nobody has a part-time life. Everybody has a full-time life. They need a part-time or a full-time job. And by being organized in this way, it takes some money and it takes some space, but we are able to store machines. We build them at the same rate year-round, but during the wintertime, we store the machines up for the coming springtime, and which is our primary selling season. That principle, again, that came out of trying to do right by people and take care of people, and so that gives you an idea of why are you different, or are you different than everybody else? And the answer is, because of following Christ, we are different, and not being different to be strange or weird, but different for a good reason. It would be our guiding statement.
I like that. I like that. Have you ever found this calling challenged by the business reality?
Yes, we live in a world where business has its ups and downs, and hard times and good times. We've had some of both of those. Having a challenge to operating your business, for any business, I suppose, is if you're in a down time, and it can even lead to failure of business. There's no guarantees that a person that's a Christian or not, as the Bible says, it rains on the just and the unjust. So sometimes these kinds of things come upon all of us, and being a Christian believing company doesn't exempt us from some of those kinds of times. Our company, if you read our story, we've been flat broke one time and nearly broke a second time in the last 50 years of work, and we know what it's like. I always like to try to emphasize that to people too, because some people assume if you've been successful, they look at your company and say, well, I see you've been successful. I guess you've always been successful. And the answer to that is no, we haven't always been successful. Some of the things that we got into led to failure. I'm talking about financial failure. And when that happens like that, it's a test on, you would question, did I do something wrong?
Yeah.
Is this being punished for something that I did? And the answer is we've all failed and lived in failure, and God's grace is our salvation is offered by God's grace. Anyway, I think it's important to know when you start out on a business, start a business and start out, you're hoping, of course, to be successful, but there's no guarantees. There's a lot of risk in our economy and our capitalistic society. There's no bailout plan for, there have been some businesses that are thought to be essential to the point that the government had to reach in and rescue them. Well, that's not us. We've never been in a business like that. When you fail, you fail. So that's enough of that.
So at Walker Manufacturing, your name isn't just on the business, it is the business. What does it mean to carry that weight of a family-owned company where Walker's both the brand and the bloodline?
Well, I immediately think about verses in the Bible when they talk about a good name, the Bible talks about having a good name. And in Proverbs 2, I've got it written down here, 22:1, a good name is better than gold. We and I suppose most businesses, it's one of the things, the objectives to having a successful business is to have a good name. And the way you, of course, have a good name is that you do the things that need to be done to be trusted and respected.
Absolutely.
And those kind of behaviors eventually cause the name to mean something good when somebody hears, well, I've heard good things about that company. Well, the reason why you've heard good things is because they've done some good things. And that kind of news, I mean, bad news spreads, of course, but good news can also spread. It's just a slow process of building. Every day you work on that. And since there's new people always being born and coming into the world, somehow we've got to connect to that next generation so that it gets passed on. People commonly talk about brand building as a big part of what they do with their marketing efforts is to build their brand. Well, again, we believe in that too. It's very important. It's important work. I would just say to you that we not only the company name, the product name, but since we're making lawnmowers here, and we're making riding lawnmowers. We don't make a walk-behind model where you walk behind them, commonly called a walking mower or walk. But you can see in the early years, when we first started coming into the market, we had people tell us, the name Walker on your machine is confusing because people think of it as a walk-behind mower instead of a riding mower.
Wow.
We said to ourselves, though, if we do a good job of building our name, pretty soon we can actually turn that to our favor, so that when people talk about a walker mower, they immediately think of our machine instead of a walk-behind mower.
Yeah.
And, so it's a little bit of we've created a little bit of a challenge for ourselves, but we also think maybe, again, it's been a benefit. And we certainly agree with the idea, if you have a product or a service, either one, and you put your name on it, when somebody comes and has a problem or needs help with your particular product, if your name is on the product, the customer knows and how you respond to their questions or requests. They know that when they're talking to a walker of our family, they're talking to somebody that we want to do everything we can to do right by people and build a good name.
Absolutely. How do you honor past generations while innovating for the future?
We have a little saying that I've written down here that kind of answers that question, and it's simply this statement: change without changing. Change without changing. It's a little phrase. So the change part is the recognition that things are always changing, and certainly in the times we live in, change is not only happening, it's happening faster than ever. And so somebody that doesn't want to have any change, they shouldn't try to be in the business. They're going to get left behind.
Yeah.
So change should be embraced. And as an older gentleman here myself now, I can look back and it's awesome, the changes that have happened in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
I can't even begin to imagine what it's going to be like another lifetime away. But I know, and there are some bad things that happen with change, but there's so much good that I don't want to go back.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for the good old days. I just want to live today the fullest I can and embrace change. But there's also the without changing part, change without changing. Without changing is embracing the principles and the ideals under which a company is operated, like we've been talking about earlier. What do we believe? Foundational beliefs and values and morals and other behaviors are never going to, it's always going to be in style. It's always going to be, and those principles can be lived without, generation to generation can live without changing your values. I firmly believe that. We've seen it in our family, my parents, my grandparents, me and my brother and myself, our siblings, and now our grandkids and great grandkids. We're seeing that it's possible to live with consistent, maybe again, just change is going to be there, but the unchanging part can be the foundation, the rock that you build on.
I like that. Talking about change in business and it being 2025, I would just love to hear your perspective on artificial intelligence and like what all about that.
I'm probably not going to be able to be much help with artificial. I've tried to learn, and I have so much to learn about artificial intelligence. It's being promoted so heavily right
Yeah,
now. It's hard for me to separate how much of this is actually valuable and how much of it is just people trying to stir up a new opportunity for themselves.
absolutely.
I get quite a few emails these days with different people offering to be a practitioner for you to help you put AI to work in your, and of course some of them are claiming tremendous amounts of money are being saved, and companies are being greatly helped by as they embrace AI. So yeah, there's just a lot of questions. For example, I like to write and have written a book, and
Hmm.
I do other. That's been one of my primary things that I've done in my work life is write.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody else or AI to write for me.
Hmm.
I don't. And if it can help improve my, I'm not saying I don't want to. I quite often have had an editor or editors read some of my text and make sure that I'm saying things in a. I don't mind that kind of help, but I sure don't want some artificial genie throwing down text and then me signing off on it and saying, well, yeah, I wrote that.
Yeah.
No, so that's a concern. But I've understood too that uh, there are so much information can be gathered quickly, apparently, by knowing how to ask questions, and even sometimes the first time you ask the question you may not get the answers you were looking for, but that'll lead to another question which will
Hmm.
reveal, and there's so much data out there. AI does apparently help that whole process of looking through tons and
Yeah,
millions
it's
of
crazy.
bits of information and bringing together something that would take years of research to do the old way can be done in a few minutes now with that. So I'm looking forward to trying to when I see some opportunities for research. I've got questions. I'm going to try AI and see if I can get some, learn how to get some
Yeah,
answers.
that's good. Embrace the change. I love it. What values are non-negotiable because of the family legacy?
Well, I would just say that we want to keep operating by biblical principles and in that way honor the Lord's name. We just think contrary to those who like to pick the Bible, and there's a whole group of people out there that are questioning the authority of the Bible to be authoritative and to provide a great source of wisdom. There are those that want to say, well, we've got to, for modern day people, this text has worked for thousands of years, but right now we've got to change it. We got to decide what's true, and we get to decide, and that's not right. We just get to discover what's true, but we don't get to make the truth ourselves. The truth is the truth,
Yeah.
and we think the Bible contains this truth. The thing is, the Bible is not a textbook on business. Some people will throw that back at you and say, "Why are you talking about the Bible? We're talking about business now. What does the Bible have to do? What's the Bible got to do with that?"
Hmm.
It has everything to do with it when you get to principles of living and working both at the family level and at the business level. It's not, again, it's not a textbook on a lot of these questions, but for people that study it and read it and pray over it, like we try to do, we get answers and wisdom that we don't know. It's just the truth,
Yeah,
and the truth will help guide us in our work and help us to honor so that God's name is honored by the way we conduct ourselves and the way we try to live out the principles.
absolutely. You shared in the walk away about the Great Recession and the hard decision to let people go. How did you lead through that storm, especially as a faith-driven leader?
Well, this was a crisis time. 2009 was a bad time. We had planned to build over 7,000 of our lawnmowers that year and had created the plans to do that and had everything in place. And then came 2009, the spring of 2009, where our business simply went down in terms of the numbers of machines being sold. We had to readjust our factory to survive, and it required, for the first time in a long time, we had to do some layoffs. In fact, we had 2 layoffs, and we had 2 plant additional time off furlough at the factory. Stopped production for a couple of weeks. Um, there was a lot. Yeah, we wrote about that in our book. And what we did, my brother and I both prayed and asked the Lord to show us what to do.
Yeah.
And we read the Bible. I know for me, I was out taking a walk for exercise, and it came to me what one thing we could do. It turned out later my brother had the very same idea. And here was our idea. We had these 2 layoffs, and we were about getting ready to have another layoff toward the end of the year, that is 2009.
Hmm.
And it came to both of us that we could help save some jobs if we would just send some of our people, our factory workers, out into our community and do some community work like painting, cleanup, remodel. We went to some agencies where people go and ask for help. We went to them, and some of it came through just networking. But we sent several work crews out over several weeks, and that gave them something to do. They were on our payroll. We were paying them to do this, to go out
Interesting.
in the community. It wasn't as if we were saving money. We were spending the money but we didn't have enough work in the factory to keep everybody busy, and we didn't just want to have people stand around looking for work. And so that, interestingly enough, that idea, my brother and I had this idea. We believe the Lord gave us that idea. And putting it to practice, it worked. We kept our people, we avoided a layoff, and by January of that next year, 2010, our business began to turn around and began to pick up. And in fact, we had to kind of scramble to catch back up. We waited maybe a little too long to slow down. But anyway, that a time like that, and it seemed to us, again, I didn't get an audible voice, but I got a strong idea in my heart what to do. And I believe that came from the Lord.
Yeah. What was the emotional toll of that season?
Laying off people, we carry that idea of loving people, taking care of people, and the people that have been entrusted to us. When you have to do a layoff, it's terrible, painful. My brother and I both said to ourselves, we don't want to ever go through something like this again.
Hmm.
If we have, because it was a terrible time. We were able to rehire a number of the people that got laid off. We rehired them as soon as we could, and all that came back and asked to be rehired, we were able to give them over a period of several months. There, we were able to get back to going again.
That's awesome. So one question I did have, so when did the book get published? What year?
20, I think 21, 20 or 20. I started working on it in 20 and then finished in 21.
Okay, so it was after you wrote it during COVID. Is that correct?
That's right. When COVID hit, we did shut down our factory for 3 weeks. we were trying to figure out, the government was saying that, we were supposed to close if we were not an essential business. And we, for 3 weeks there, we really couldn't get anybody to tell us if we were essential or not. We finally got a hold of the National Landscape Association and found out that, in talking to them, that exterior maintenance, building maintenance around buildings was considered an essential function. And so landscapers, people that use our kind of equipment professionally, were exempted and were considered essential. And so we said, well, if the people that use our equipment are essential, then we're making the equipment. I guess we're essential. So
Wow.
anyway, I started writing the book when we had 3 weeks there, and I think it was March or April, whenever COVID first really started and they began to shut things down. I began to write the book. I'd always talked about writing a book, and this just seemed like the right time to do it. So that's what I did.
I like it. So you guys weren't really affected by COVID very much, it sounds like?
We, like a lot of people, were affected in a lot of different ways. It was interesting. Our people, after we reopened after 3 weeks, we told our employees on a voluntary basis, you don't have to come back to work if you don't want to. And if you're concerned about COVID, stay home.
Mhm.
But if you want to come to work, we're going to open our doors and follow the guidelines that the government gives us. We're going to go ahead and operate. And it was interesting. We got 90% of our workforce came to work the next week. The following week we were at 95, and finally we were full strength. After 3 weeks, we were 100%. We had a nice response by our people, or people that wanted to work and didn't want to sit around with a mask on and wait for somebody to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
So, but we had some some other challenges. A lot of ripple effect here of COVID. Like you hear to people talk about supply chain disruption. We certainly experienced that and months and months afterward. Again, we make a lot of our machine parts right here at our factory, but we buy a lot of component parts from outside our company, and most of them, or many of them, are American-made components. We pride ourselves on being a U.S. manufactured product, and so we didn't have a lot of overseas sourcing of our parts, but still, the ripple effect is some of our other suppliers did have some connections that were disrupted by the COVID pandemic.
Interesting. Interesting. What would you say to a leader facing similar choices today?
I would quote to them Proverbs 3:5. I've got it written down here. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. That's a key verse, I think, for anybody in leadership of a family or a business, because pretty clearly humans, we have our human frailty. And there's limits to our wisdom and our ability to understand what direction we should go. It sure is good to be able to ask the Lord
Absolutely. Absolutely.
for direction and guidance and help, and be willing to even take some steps outside of human wisdom and say, I'm a person of faith, and I believe I'm doing what I have asked for. I've been asking for wisdom. I believe now it's been given to me. Now it's up to me to put it to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. This relates so well. Getting ready for this podcast, I was a little anxious. And so I called my father-in-law, asked him kind of for his prayers just to get ready for the podcast. And he quotes this to me: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your understanding. Like,
Well, I've always been interested. I watched my dad develop products, and particularly we started out in our story, he built golf cars
yeah,
in the first years, and then a little truckster unit was built in the 60s, and then a tractor cab cooler in the 70s. And finally, lawnmowers started in the 70s, and we began to produce in the 80s on up to today. A lot of times my dad would work at night out in the shop developing his products. And I remember as a kid, I loved to get up in the morning, get my clothes on, and head out there and see what my dad had worked on during the night. And I could oftentimes see something that he had created during the night
wow,
was it was installed or in place on the product, and I recognized that's my dad's work. And anyway, yeah, his answers that he got were amazing sometimes on how to solve problems as you design a product, a machine.
So, chapter one was definitely my favorite chapter of the book. Watching your father go through so much to build this, what does that story mean to you now as you lead this company?
Well, the story, we got to live the story along with our parents. We were, of course, growing up as kids. I was in the 6th grade when Dad started to leave the farming operation, and began to develop the first product, which was the golf car. So we literally saw our parents step out and do something completely different than farming. We didn't understand it so much then, but we do now. The risk that they took, as I said earlier, there's no guarantees that this is all could come to failure. And in
Absolutely.
fact, it did come to failure for in our story. But I don't know, looking back now, we're so thankful that our parents went through this startup and this entrepreneurial adventure that became the company that we are today. None of that would have happened if it hadn't been for them being taking the risk and doing what they did to get the company started. I always like to give a lot of credit. My dad was the entrepreneur and the inventor and designer of the equipment. He did not have a college degree. He didn't have any training in particular in manufacturing or business or marketing or sales or finance. None of that. All these things that you really need to have some experience with, he didn't have that experience. He learned a lot of it the hard way. But I like to give a lot of credit to my mother. I never heard her question or doubt that we were doing the right thing. I think and I'm being sexist here, but I think a lot of women want security and a lot of men want adventure. I mean, that's just kind of the way our DNA. But again, my mother was an amazing partner to my dad, and I don't think the company, it would have been easy enough for her to stop the whole thing if she would have insisted on safety. But instead, uh, I never heard that negative. I only heard positive from my mother. So we're privileged people. I also would like to give just a little shout out to my parents. Some people like to talk about privilege, and they like to, in a racist sense, like to say, well, I've got the right family background, I've got the right color of skin. Well, they're being accused of having special privilege. I will tell you that I'm a privileged guy, but it's not the color of my skin, it's my parents. I was so privileged. I had 2 parents who loved each other. They loved us kids, and they loved the Lord. You can't beat that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm thankful
Yeah,
and grateful, because none of this would ever happen if I hadn't had the kind of parents that I did.
that's awesome. So, in your book, you wrote about sticking to the Lord's plan, not always knowing the outcome. What has that looked like recently?
Well, we've been going through a slower time in a business cycle, slower time right now, and that started in 2024. So we've had to slow down our factory and make some adjustments. It's not like happened to us in 2009, but still, we had a plan to produce units, a certain number of units, and we've had to slow down, and we've reduced our factory output to try to match the market. So it brings up the idea of growth. I would like to talk a little bit about growth. We have a statement that we use here to talk about our attitude toward growth. Some people will say to you, if you're not growing, you're dying
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to fail. That doesn't take into account the idea that there are business cycles that happen that are beyond our control. We can't control everything, and certainly the economy is one aspect. Weather is another one that we depend on quite a bit on rain, adequate rain and moisture for the grass to grow so it can be cut with one of our lawnmowers. Anyway, we have a little saying here, never allow growth to be the main goal. It is an outcome from doing everything else right. So some companies are obsessed and get obsessed with growth, particularly publicly traded companies where they're depending on investors or people to purchase their stock and invest in it. And those shareholders or those stakeholders generally are involved for only one reason, and that is they want to multiply money.
Yeah.
So there's things you can do. Some of your big corporations, that's exactly what they do. They focus on a growth rate, and they tell their people that buy their stock, if you invest with us, you're going to see growth every 3 months. It's going to be a growth month. I mean, that's a way of thinking that some people, again, publicly trade, they tend to operate by that. We can, as a private family-owned business, we can take a different track here, where we work as hard as we can and do everything we can to create an opportunity for the company to be successful and prosperous. The idea is that the growth, if we do everything else right, the growth tends to take care of itself.
Yeah.
Growth is an outcome instead of a goal.
Mm-hmm.
So in a time like this that we're having, we're doing our best. We're not growing, but we're not dying either. We're working as hard as we can, and we'll continue to work to build opportunity off of what we're doing here. So that's the Lord hasn't promised us that we'll always prosper in a measurable way, but this is kind of we'll work as hard as we can and believe we're following the Lord's plan. The outcome, we'll leave that up to the Lord to figure out how much outcome we have from our work.
How do you descend between God's direction and your own ambition?
Well, I just think that listening, I've been talking about listening for God's voice is a key, and reading the Bible is the other key. And those sound like that's real. Everybody says that, but I think for me, discipline of just continuing to listen for God's voice and reading the Bible are a great help to keep on track. And some people say the Lord talks to me every day. I get direction. I've not found that to be quite where I live, especially on key decisions. Sometimes it takes a while to hear God's voice come to you, like we experienced in 2009. It wasn't instantaneous that we knew what to do. We had to pray and counsel with others and read Scripture. All three aspects of that helped us know what we needed to do, and we did it, and we survived. We came through it.
So wrapping it up, when you look at where Walker is now, what gives you the most peace?
I like to ask, the typical question to ask a business owner or a business operator is, why are you in business? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
It deserves a good answer. And a lot of people might say, well, most people are going to say, I'm in business to make a lot of money. But for myself anyway, for all that you go through to be in business, if that's your, I think you should just invest your money and go do something else.
Yeah.
It's way too hard to just say, well, I'm going to invest it with some bankers. Let them multiply it for you.
Yeah.
But a better answer, the one that satisfies me and gives me the most peace, is, why am I in business? I'm in business to create multiplied opportunities, not just for myself, but for many other people. And by operating this business, again, I'm gonna have a measure of return for my work. But look at how many people have been touched by the existence of a business, and that gives me peace to know that I think we have a good reason for this business to exist. The way you can lay that out is, we have our direct employees. There's about 180 of us right now. We have been some higher in past years, but let's just say around figures 200 people have their livelihood right here working in this company. That looks like, well, okay, that's nice, but it's much bigger than that. And here's how to trace it out. First of all, we have a whole group of suppliers that make things that go into our machine. There's jobs in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, The Midwest, especially where we buy a lot of the component parts that we put into our machines, are made in those states.
Hmm.
And there's people that have jobs every day. Part of their job, anyway, is making parts that go into our mowers. And I'm talking about multiplication now.
Yeah.
There's a group of truck drivers that drive in and out of here bringing things to us and taking things away that we've manufactured. Those truck drivers, part of their job is because we exist
Hmm.
and manufacture. Then there's the factory employees. Then we have distributors and dealers that take the product from us and provide sales and service to the end customer. They have some of their livelihood up selling and servicing our products. And finally, you have about 2/3 of our machines are sold to private contractors, people who their livelihood is taking care of properties, keeping them the mowed and landscaped maintained. If you add all those people up, it's much bigger than just a factory with 200 people.
Hmm.
I like to say there are thousands. I don't think I'm exaggerating. There are thousands of people that have an opportunity or that have been multiplied out of this. Or to say it another way, if this business did not exist, how many people would be touched by that? And that's my answer to being at peace about what we do here and why we
I
exist.
love it. I love it. I was waiting for you to bring that up as we kind of close out here on the podcast. That was a big topic that I liked from the book, so I'm glad you brought that up. So, Bob, I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Just kind of tell us about how we can get connected with you and your book.
As far as getting in contact with and knowing about our company, we have a website like everybody, walker.com. You can go there. If you're interested in my book, this is the Walker Way book. I wrote that. It's available three ways. Amazon has it available to purchase as a paperback. You can also do an Audible, and I'm the voice. You've heard me talking. Now you'll hear my voice read this book to you on an Audible. And finally, you can order it from Walkerware, which is on our website, thewalker.com. There's a place where we have collectible clothing and collectible items, and the book is available to be ordered there. You can order a copy I'll autograph it for you if you like. And so that's a way you can get a hold of us. And of course, I'm still an old-fashioned guy. I'll answer an email or a phone call. And be happy to talk to people. Sometimes it's amazing the people that will give you a call or contact you. We particularly enjoy young people. I'm talking about 10, 11, and 12-year-old young people who are interested in lawn mowing, and they get interested in our mowers. And we have some really young people that start their own mowing businesses and use our mowers.
Wow.
And we get a particular thrill out of that.
Thanks for sharing that. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Did a great job.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.